Can Kentucky Derby winner Mage win the Triple Crown? Let's talk about it. Salutations and welcome, friends. I'm your host of this very special edition of Trust the Profits. My name is Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailDemenace. First of all, thank you so much to everybody who's been tuning in, subscribing, liking, engaging, commenting on all of our videos leading up to and through the 2023 Kentucky Derby. We're not going anywhere. We still have the Preakness, the Belmont. We got a summer at Saratoga. We got to get ready for the fall season, and that's Keeneland's meet. And then, of course, the Breeders' Cup. We're with you all year. So listen, if you haven't pressed that subscribe button already on YouTube, make sure to do that. We got a ton of content here from graded stakes previews, international racing, live betting, doubling down, betting shows, handicapping shows, etc. We have it all. We bring on guests from across the industry. Really don't want to miss all the content that we have here on Trust the Profits. Make sure to like this video and comment below with what you think Mage's chances are at holding and winning the Triple Crown after running the next two legs potentially of the Triple Crown series. But this is obviously going to be the big question now that Mage has won the 2023 Kentucky Derby, somewhat of a moderate upset, I would say, a horse that I think a lot of us liked actually in our last long shots preview that we had done here on the channel. Mage was the number one value play that we gave out in that video. I was shocked that he went off at the price that he did. He was a horse I expected to get bet down significantly because I felt like there was a lot of buzz around him coming out of that Florida Derby, but ultimately he actually remained pretty stagnant on the board. Some other horses took money instead of him, and he ran a heck of a race. I think we all have recognized, and if you go back and listen to my stuff, you listen to El Hombre stuff, you listen to Colin's stuff, the formula stuff, all of us here on the channel all, I think, recognize the potential of Mage, but he put it all together on the biggest stage, and that was really awesome. Just an amazing, amazing ride there for for Javier Castellano, and it was just an incredible effort, incredible day. But now, as soon as things get done and as soon as the euphoria of winning the Kentucky Derby is over, then the question, of course, is, well, what's next? And the connections were asked that on Sunday morning. By all accounts, Mage has come out of the race healthy, fine, eating, content, happy, looking good. The owners and trainers have said, listen, we're not going to rush to a decision. We want to see how the horse responds in the next 24 to 48 hours. But if things progress the way that they already are looking, which is very good, then listen, we're going to go up to Preakness and we're going to run in the second leg of the Triple Crown. So the intent, I think, is there by the connections. They want to run there, but they were very honest. They said if he ran third or fourth place or something like that, they probably would have skipped the Preakness, gone to the Matt Wynn Stakes instead as his next step. But now that they won, listen, they're going to continue on this journey. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about here today is, what chance does Mage have at winning the Triple Crown? He's in a very unique position. He's the first horse since Justify to win, having not raced as a 2-year-old, okay, and has very few races under his belt. So he is a very lightly raced horse and is an ascending horse. And of course, there's not a lot of precedent in terms of who can and cannot win the Triple Crown because we had that massively long drought. And then we had 2 Bob Baffert horses win. So and I'm not going to get in and litigate anything about Bob Baffert, but it just shows, that California connection. Baffert, I think really had 2 obviously outstanding horses in American Pharoah and Justify. And those were, I don't want to say unique circumstances, but that was one trainer handling both of those Triple Crown winners. And now you have, in Gustavo Delgado, you have a much smaller level trainer, lower level. I don't want to say lower level, but just a smaller operation down there in South Florida, taking the hold and navigating Mage through this Triple Crown run. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say apples to oranges, but it is a little bit of a different comparison, I think, as opposed to, let's say, if a Steve Asmussen horse won or a Todd Pletcher horse won. But now we see Delgado, and I'm thrilled. You love to see all the Venezuelan connections, the internationalization of the sport. We talked about it with the Japanese, but anybody who spent any amount of time down in South Florida, down in Gulfstream Park, knows the influence of Venezuela on horse racing in that community. So great to see all of that. Great to see, obviously, obviously Javier get that big win yesterday. But let's talk a little bit about Mage and whether or not he can win this Triple Crown this year. And I think there's a few different ways to look at it. Obviously, such an impressive run there yesterday in the Kentucky Derby, and making the move in the stretch, not making the move maybe a little too early that he might have when he was in the Florida Derby, and getting by two fills, holding off a late charge from Angel of Empire. But let's talk a little bit about it. And so let's dive into Mage a little bit, because I think there are some pros and there are some cons to Mage and his form right now. I think if you want to look on the pro side, this is a very lightly raced horse. Now, why is that a good thing? I would say that's a good thing because this is not a horse that has been campaigning throughout a 2-year-old and 3-year-old year. Now, I know the con is going to be, and I have it over here, he's inexperienced. He may not have the foundation. I actually think too much foundation as you get further on in the Triple Crown is actually detrimental. If you've been running in all of these preps, all of these even pre-prep races, I think of a horse like Two Fills, for instance, who's been running in several preps, but running in the street sense before that, running in all of those prep races and, high-level races as a 2-year-old as well. You start to wonder, do horses start getting tired, getting wheeled back every single month for the last, 4, 5, 6 months. And now they're getting wheeled back on a 2-week rest in between the Derby and the Preakness. And so it is, I think, a legitimate question to go, maybe a younger horse that still has a lot of freshness in his legs, doesn't have a lot of races under him. Maybe that bounce back is not as severe. I think that, like I said, he's a lightly raced horse. You see it here with the Beyer speed figures. This is the latest from Daily Racing Form with the Kentucky Derby added into the running line. Obviously, you see that progression from an 88 Beyer speed figure in the Fountain of Youth to a 94 in the Florida Derby to a 105 in the Kentucky Derby. If you also look at his workouts, there's a ton of energy. He is working out regularly at 6 furlongs or aggressive 5 furlong works. Gustavo Delgado clearly thinks this horse has a lot of energy in him to work him out in that way. I think it also gives him a lot of foundation, even though it's not a lot of racing. He's working out aggressively and building stamina, building good foundation there. I think there's still a lot to like. And the other part is he is still an improving horse. If you watch the Kentucky Derby, and I've watched it now 3-4 times and watched the replay another, in terms of just segments of like the break and things like that, probably about 10 or 15 times, trying to look at how every single horse broke out of the gate in these different spots. Mage still broke slowly. It was not a great break. Javier, all credit to him, guiding that horse inside and really keeping him, on the inside rail, even though he was further back. I thought gave a brilliant ride, but there's still room for improvement with Mage. You could say if this horse breaks a little bit better and alertly, could he potentially be sitting a much better trip, a much more forwardly placed trip? Remember, this is a horse that wired the field first time out, going 7 furlongs at Gulfstream Park. That was only back in January 28th. It's now May 7th as I record this, and we're talking about the Kentucky Derby winner. This is a lot that's happened very quickly. Now, on the con side, like I said, you could look at this and go, listen, he's inexperienced. Maybe he caught lightning in a bottle a little bit. This was maybe not the strongest crop of horses, but, can he handle this type of sustained success across 3 races like the Preakness and the Belmont as we're stretching out in distance in terms of the Belmont? The Preakness, of course, 1 mile and 3/16, slightly shorter than the Kentucky Derby at 1 mile and a quarter. There's also the question of, do you bounce from a career effort? Do you go from running that 105 to running something a little less than that at the 1 mile and 3/16 at the Preakness in 2 weeks? Can you only get back to maybe 100 Beyer speed figure? And is that good enough to win a second leg in the Triple Crown? I think that's a legitimate question to be asking. And, on one hand, you could say, listen, the numbers have done nothing but increase since the Fountain of Youth. So why should we think the numbers won't continue to increase, or at the very least, maybe just plateau? And that might be good enough. But there is a legitimate concern. This is a career effort. Does he bounce off that big of a career effort and that big of a jump on a short rest? We'll have to wait and see. I think that is a legitimate argument against why Mage might not get there. Listen, from a pedigree standpoint, he should get it. In terms of Preakness, should not be a problem for him. You got good magic up top, which is, of course, a progeny of Curlin. Good Magic, despite being a very young sire, still has an incredible average winning distance of well over 7 furlongs, which is very, very high for a young sire. Typically, young sires, you see average winning distances of 6 furlongs, some variation of 6 furlongs, because a lot of their younger horses are running in sprints early on. Good Magic, you're already seeing his horses stretching out. He had 2 runners in this race. He is a very, very, very good sire. And so he's got good progeny there. Puka underneath, very good dam as well in terms of producing offspring. Mage's half sister, or yeah, I think it's a half sister, is Gunning, who's actually a stakes placed horse who actually just finished second in a $150,000 stakes race just last week, actually. So, there's some precocity and there is some really strong pedigree both up top and underneath to suggest that this is a horse that has a really, really bright future, is not just a flash in the pan at the Kentucky Derby, and can really follow this up with some impressive efforts. So, listen, there's some pros, but there are also some cons. And one of the final cons is he's going to be facing some new shooters. This is not just going to be all of the same horses from the Kentucky Derby wheeling back in 2 weeks. You're going to get new horses entering the race. And I think that is potentially the biggest challenge that he's going to face, because this is right now the projected field for the Preakness Stakes coming up in 2 weeks. And there's still obviously a lot of speculation, but there's very few horses actually coming back from the Kentucky Derby. If you notice, only Confidence Game for Keith DeSormo, Disarm for Steve Asmussen, and Two Fills for Larry Ravelli are the only 4 horses that are at this point projected to go to the Preakness. Now, I would even say Two Fills is maybe a possible rather than a probable. Two Fills ran his eyeballs out on Saturday. I mean, that was an amazing effort from Two Fills, Jareth Loveberry, and Larry Ravelli. Incredibly proud effort for Two Fills, a horse I loved. I don't need to defend my perspective on that, because anybody who's watched any of my videos knows how much I like Two Fills. But he ran a huge race, and maybe he needs a little bit of time off. It does seem as if Confidence Game, DeSormo had said before the Kentucky Derby, they were going to run in all 3 legs of the Triple Crown, win or lose. And Disarm for Asmussen is a horse that I'll be interested if they wheel him back in 2 weeks. I know it's been projected that that's where he'll be going, but this is a horse, remember, that ran in the Louisiana Derby, then ran in the Lexington, now ran in the Kentucky Derby, is potentially going to be running in the Preakness. That would be 4 races in the better part of 8 weeks. That would be an incredibly rigorous campaign for a very young horse. So we'll have to wait and see with Disarm, but that is kind of where we're standing with those horses coming in from the Kentucky Derby. But look at the names in here that are fresh shooters. Forte, who of course defeated Mage at the Florida Derby, who was scratched the morning of the Kentucky Derby by the Kentucky equine vets due to the misstep and a potential bone bruise or hoof bruise that was very problematic that they saw. They thought he was favoring his front right leg, did not want to give it, take any chances, was scratched, I think, against the protest of his owner, Mike Rapole, and trainer Todd Pletcher. I think both of them wanted to keep Forte in the race. Ultimately, Forte scratches and looks to be headed to the Preakness. Now, I know some people are saying Forte should wait and go to the Belmont. Pletcher has already said Tappet Trice is going to go to the Belmont. That seems to be his Belmont horse. I would be shocked if Forte went to the Belmont, only because Forte's pedigree is a little bit more questionable in 1.5 miles. I was even concerned if he could get 1.25 miles. I think 1 3/16 at the Preakness is a really good distance for him. I think 1.1 miles is kind of his ideal distance. But I think there is at least some questions about, do you really put Forte in a 1.5 mile race? I don't know if that's really what he wants. Whereas Mage presumably actually wouldn't mind 1.5 mile race. I think that progeny is certainly Good Magic and Curlin bloodlines. You would suggest he's going to want all the distance you want to give him. So Forte, like I said, is going to be coming back for that Preakness. First mission for Brad Cox, a huge horse who is a really, really good runner, who won that Lexington Stakes, is going to be going to that Preakness. And that's a really dangerous horse for Brad Cox, who, of course, had 4 runners, Angel of Empire finishing a very close third in the Kentucky Derby. But first mission, not even in that field, but a very, very talented colt. going to be going to the Preakness, and that's, I think, a really serious colt that you have to take into consideration there. Then you have National Treasure coming in from the West Coast. Now, I know I have here Tim Yakteen could be transferred back to Bob Baffert. Remember, now that we're now through the national nightmare. Bob Baffert can enter horses again at Churchill Downs starting next year, and he can obviously enter horses in the rest of the Triple Crown races. So that horse could be transferred back to Bob Baffert. I'm not confirmed whether or not that has happened yet already, but National Treasure, a horse that a lot of us really liked, and myself included, finished third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, finished fourth at that Santa Anita Derby, but coming off a little bit of a layoff. National Treasure, very good horse, very capable horse who likes more and more distance. So going a mile and 3/16 presumably would be beneficial there and would be very fresh coming off that Santa Anita Derby last time out. Then you're looking at a horse like Red Route 1, who, of course, just won a kind of a prep race for the Preakness last time out and was on the Derby trail throughout the spring. For Steve Asmussen, we all know where Red Route 1's going to be. It's going to be way in the back, and he's going to come running up fast. And so running up late, Red Route 1, though, that would be another very intriguing name. And then you have Blazing Sevens. Chad Brown pulled this move last year. Blazing Sevens qualifies for the Kentucky Derby, just like early voting did last year. What does he do? He pulls early voting out, puts and points him towards the Preakness. He's doing the exact same thing with Blazing Sevens. Pulled him out of the Kentucky Derby, pointing him towards the Preakness. I don't think Blazing Sevens is as good as is nearly as good as what we saw from early voting last year. And also last time out finished third in the Bluegrass. That Bluegrass did not come back particularly strong in the Kentucky Derby, with Verifying, I think, finishing second or third to last, and Tapit Trice finishing seventh, and those were the first two finishers, and Blazing Sevens well behind the two of them, but would be fresh. That would have been in the last race, and so would have been on a little bit more of a normal cycle. And then Ed Mosier Jr. is going to be bringing in Chase the Chaos, who won the El Camino Real, and that's a nice horse. Now, you could say that's a little bit more of a synthetic horse, a product from Golden Gate, but Chase the Chaos is not a bad horse at all, and so those are going to be your potential projected field. There still might be a couple of extra horses that get in there. So the big question is, we started at the top, is can Mage win the Triple Crown? I think he's got a couple barriers in front of him, ultimately, is where I would come down on this. And I'd probably lean towards no, only because historically that is the right answer usually. But it is one of those things where this is not an overwhelming crop of horses. So if a young horse like this can catch lightning in a bottle, it wouldn't be shocking. I think this is a year you could absolutely do that. I do always worry about the new shooters angle. And that is something that is it's the nature of these races, that when you have these new shooters come in, they're fresh, they're geared up, they're focused on this one, they're training up to this particular race. That's a little bit different than if you're on the Triple Crown, which is kind of a slog, and it's a real difficult thing. And so, listen, history would always say no. I think there are some legitimate reasons to think that Mage has a shot, though. And I think you could say, listen, he's only going to get better. He's young. He's not worn out. He's not tired. He's come out of the Kentucky Derby looking great. And this, like I said, is not an overwhelming field. He's been training fantastically leading up to this Kentucky Derby. Why can't he continue to take some steps forward? So a lot to like there, certainly with Mage. I think the answer is ultimately no, but that's why we run the races, right? We got to wait and see and find out. So it certainly gives us something to talk about and speculate about the next 2 weeks leading up to the Preakness. And if he wins that, then we're really going to be on high alert and whether or not he can do it at the 1.5 mile Belmont. But listen, from a pedigree standpoint, he can do it, I think, in terms of getting the distance. I don't think that's going to be an issue for any of these future races. He's got the running style that could potentially set up nicely. He doesn't need the lead. He's not a dead closer. He can be very mid-pack, very versatile. And he's got the ability to get better. He still has yet to run his best race and most complete race. I mean, he still didn't have a great break coming out of there. So this horse learns to break a little bit better. Maybe he gets a little bit of an easier trip. There's going to be fewer horses for him to contend with in these next two legs of the Triple Crown. Reason for optimism, perhaps. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate everybody tuning in today to talk a little bit and listen to me talk a little bit about Mage's chances at getting the Triple Crown. Make sure to press that subscribe button here on YouTube. Like this video. Comment with what you think his chances are at the Triple Crown, or who do you like winning the Preakness and Belmont Stakes. Make sure to throw me a follow on Twitter at the handle @Failed to Menace. And remember, friends, until next time, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.